Sweet friends, welcome back to Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? And today I am over the moon excited to welcome one of the most brilliant, one of the most compassionate, one of the most unique thinkers, not only that I have ever met, but I would dare say has walked the planet, certainly as of late. This amazing man is a successful entrepreneur, has many different lifetimes, used to be the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, and is now taking that vast genius and applying it to so many different modalities. He is a polymath, he is a mathematician, he is a musician, he is an artist, he is looking at life with the influence of so many different modalities and coming back to the most profound and simple truths. And the thing that I am most inspired by is not his audaciously wild intellect, but how he has managed to connect that steam engine into his heart and the amount of love and compassion and generosity that he moves through life with, including, not least of which, the fact that he brought not just me, but 42 of the most lit up, activated, holy humans living on the planet. He took all of us to Egypt in December to activate the throat chakra of the planet and to activate the throat chakra of the species. And he got to leverage his unprecedented access to these pyramids in Egypt so that we could benefit from that and so that we could use this collective antenna of transmission to wake up and to help to activate the voices of so many people on the planet who have not yet had the privilege of being heard. And so please join me in welcoming the amazing Robert Edward Grant to the show. Robert, I love you and welcome.
I love you too, Emily. That was the most amazing intro I think I've ever had.
When did you know that you might be a polymath? Like, when did you fall in love with math and geometry?
I think I was always kind of in love with it, even when I was a kid. My dad taught me geometry,
Okay.
and my dad was really good. His hobby was to work with wood. So he would build cabinets and beds and you name it, all kinds of stuff, just for fun. He was an aerospace engineer, but for his
Oh,
career. But basically, he would teach me how to work with wood. So he was a carpenter in a way, and I learned that skill. I learned how to do all kinds of additions on the house, and all kinds of stuff. And we did a lot of stuff together. And he taught me the first basics. I think I was probably 7 years old when he taught me the Pythagorean theorem.
at 7.
And and I remember because you have to use it to cut wood, right?
Ah,
It's like a method that you have to use. And he taught me you don't even need to measure if you understand trigonometry. If you fully understand the nature of trigonometry, you can find all the measurements that you ever would need by using this as a practical matter. So to me, geometry right from the very beginning was very practical. And I also, like my father, love working with my hands. So I think that was the first probably real introduction. So for me, it wasn't an esoteric thing. It had meaning right from the very beginning. It was a practical meaning. It wasn't a spiritual meaning. The spiritual meaning of mathematics didn't come until probably 2010, 2011,
oh,
2012. And I think it really started becoming a major beating drum for me probably around 2012, around the time that the Higgs boson was discovered on July 4th in 2012.
that's right. I remember reading that article in the New York
hmm
Times. I was like, oh my gosh, they did it. They discovered the God particle.
hmm
And really being blown away. And so that, of course, you started falling in love with that. So I've heard you say that math is the language of God.
hmm
And, most people on the show are either meditators or meditation curious. And certainly they're using meditation as a way to remind themselves of their own divinity or to plug into
hmm
source energy. But to me, I would, before meeting you, I would have thought of math as a very left brain construct, taking me out of my right brain, taking me out of that meditative state. And yet you've found a way to go so deep into this left brain mathematical formula that it reconnects you with divine. So can you just explain what that means? What is math as a language of the divine?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the anatomy of the brain, so on the left temporal lobe, which would be right here, right? If I'm right-handed, my left temporal lobe is where I process mathematics and rational thought. My right temporal lobe is where I process music. So you could say that music is just a mirror reflection of mathematical interval and ratio. And it is because all notes in music are based off of intervals of integers. That's what just tuning is in music theory. So where does geometry show up? Well, it shows up right on the, kind of at the center of the brain, right? It's
Mm,
both on the left and right sides of the brain.
hmm.
So it's kind of surrounding where the pituitary gland is. And that's also where language is, but language sits more on the left side of the brain, interestingly. It's where we process things. So I had learned 8 languages in my lifetime.
What all languages do you speak?
I speak Korean, Japanese, Mandarin, Chinese, French, German, Spanish, and Hebrew,
And English.
and English. And
Wow.
so, and I probably learned another 4 languages, at some basic level of proficiency that I don't even count,
Hmm.
right? So I learned a method to learn languages. And I created the method myself because I didn't like all the methods that were out there, Rosetta, all that stuff. I didn't like any of it because it was all based on rote memorization. And what I figured out was that in order to become proficient in a new language, and the first new language I learned was Korean from English. I was 19 years old.
Wow.
And I was thrust into this house. I was of all things, a Mormon missionary when I was 19 years old in
Wait,
South
hold the
Korea.
phone. You were a Mormon missionary
I
at
was
19 and you went to
at
Korea.
19. I went to South Korea.
You've lived a lot
And
of
you know
lives.
why? Because I met a girl in high school, my last year of high school, and she basically was like, "Look, this is one of the most powerful things about no premarital sex. When it's like, and I was not a virgin, but I'd already, she said, okay, to date me, you have to like join the Mormon church. So
Wait,
next
you
thing I
weren't even
know, I'm in
raised
freaking South
Mormon.
Korea.
Oh my God, this is outrageous.
I know, right? I'm in South Korea. And after 2 years of being there, and she wrote me every single week, and I wrote her every week, I realized that she wasn't for me, and I was about to come home, and I extended my stay another 2 months so that she would get the message that I didn't want to date her when I got back.
Oh.
And so I remember the day I got my Dear John letter. I read it to all the other missionaries. It was pretty funny. I was on the podium. I just said, and I knew it, and we had took bets. I said, "This is my Dear John letter, everyone." I hadn't gotten one letter from her the prior week. So 1 week was missed, and I knew I was getting the Dear John. And Dear John means it's like, okay, we're breaking up type thing.
So wait, she was not in Korea. You went to Korea because you had to
No,
like,
I was in South Korea. She was in, Nebraska.
and you had to go on the trip to like initiate yourself into Mormonism.
Well, it's like you don't go there to initiate yourself. You're already kind of initiated, but when you're a member and you go to the Mormon temple, which, by the way, is basically the Freemason, it's a similar rite to the Freemasonry rite. So I'm not a Freemason, but I learned all about Freemasonry just because I had been Mormon, right? Because it
Wow.
was all Joseph Smith took the Freemasonry rites and endowments in the temple from Freemasonry and put it into Mormonism.
Wow. So you really bring up the power of this eros, like the power of this magnetism.
Hmm.
That here you are learning
Hmm.
Korean on the other side of the planet because you had this
Yep.
charge and this attraction to this woman, which is amazing. Because one of the things I want to dive into with you is this balance of masculine and feminine, and
Oh yeah.
specifically what's
Hmm.
happening in the brain. But I want to share some of your favorite quotes just so that people can understand the way that your brain thinks before we dive
Is
into
this like
this.
what's happening in the brain? Is that like the little head versus the big head brain type thing?
Well, no, I want to share what you taught me about the pineal gland and the pituitary gland and the whole of
Ah,
Brahman.
yes, of course.
But first, I wanted to quote you where you said, or actually, maybe it's you quoting Alan Watts. You said, "Man only suffers because he takes seriously what God created for fun."
Yeah.
And to me, you are such a living example of that. These things that people take so seriously, ancient sites, sacred sites, math, like archaeology. There's such an austere nature around it. And yet you're having so much fun, so much playfulness with it. And I'm curious like where that came from, that sense of play and joy and, dare I say, audacity with which you live
I
life.
think I've always had, I think, a very optimistic view on life. The funny thing is that my relationships over the last 30 plus years have, at one point in time or another, always asked me, "Are you always happy when you wake up in the morning?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Isn't everyone?
No, Robert,
Because I
I'm not.
literally wake up, I jump out of bed, and for me, I think part of what was maybe different in my path is the world a lot of people that go through the spiritual path will say that they feel like they didn't belong here in this world. They feel like
Mm.
that, it's like they're a star seed from somewhere else, and like, how did I end up here? What happened? I never felt like that. I felt like I could thrive in this world from day one, always. I never believed that I couldn't.
And do you think that's because you know it's a game? Like I've heard you talk about Leela and this divine dance,
Hmm.
and I think I've said to you, it's like, oh, I think you're winning the game of life because you're very aware that it is a game. But was that something you've always had of this like this game, this playfulness, or did you learn
No,
that?
I didn't. Look, I would say I only started contemplating the notion that we might be in some sort of gamified simulation after I discovered the alpha omega on the rim of the sarcophagus in the king's chamber. And I thought the probabilities, I looked at it from a mathematical standpoint. I'm like, probabilistically, it just doesn't make sense that I'm the one who's going to discover this.
I would beg to differ, but
Well, but I mean, it was my second trip to Egypt.
okay.
And now I make a very significant discovery, finding that no one else saw.
Hmm.
And it happened to catch my eye because I had a memory of when it was being put there thousands and thousands of years ago. And right before I saw it, I remembered being there when it was put there. And I had a very distinct memory. So I looked exactly where the memory was, and there it was.
And so, can we just give listeners a little bit of context? I'll etch it out, and you can fill in the details. But from what I've learned from
Hmm.
you, is that the King's Chamber, which is one of one of the most famous chambers in the heart of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is
Hmm.
where we went together, and specifically the King's Chamber is famously no hieroglyphics. There's no engravings. Like
Yeah.
it's just like blank. And yet you're saying on your second trip there, you discovered an alpha and an omega very faintly etched into the side of the sarcophagus, which is the only structure inside of the king's chamber. And now
Under the
you're saying
rim.
that
Yeah.
you
Onto the back rim. Hmm.
saw that because of a memory that you had, like basically like remembering a lifetime that you would have been around when that was being etched in.
Yep.
Wow. And now since then, how many discoveries of engravings and etchings have you seen inside of the king's chamber?
Well, for those people that want to watch, there's a podcast that I did do
Hmm.
on this that goes into great depth with Alex Ferrari, and it's called Next Level Soul. And in 1 week, it's already got over 500,000 views. And what we discovered was that the walls are literally covered with etches, petroglyphs that depict the decan of astrology. So the 36 decan, which are the 10-day subsets of the 12 astrological symbols, right? Which we know of as Taurus and Gemini and Leo and Cancer and all these. And then each one of these, right, has three subsets within them. So the decan would be within Taurus. There are three subsets, which are Orion, Ostrega, and Eridanus, right? Each one, Pisces has three as well. And then you've got three for each of Aquarius, et cetera. And all of those symbologies have been etched into the walls of the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber. It's as if it's a star clock.
Do you think it's a clock or a map?
It's a map and a clock. It's a map, but instead of a map in space, it's a map in time.
Mapping to
But
what?
time and space are kind of irrevocably linked.
Hmm.
So it's kind of both. And it's a giant 24,000 year cycle clock that tells us something, right? And we're trying to decipher what that is now. One of the great mysteries in the King's Chamber is there's an air shaft. There are two air shafts in the King's Chamber. They're small air shafts, and nobody knows why they're there. But one of them is exactly placed underneath the Aries constellation, which is the beginning and ending of the zodiac. So is that like a clock hand, like a hand on a clock to tell
Mm.
you here's the beginning, starting point, right, and the ending point. And so I presented it last night to, I created this app that's really badass,
So
right?
cool.
And I had it on my iPad last night. And I was in Mastro's with a well-known Egyptologist, and we're walking around Mastro's so we could walk around the King's Chamber. Everyone's like looking at us, and people are coming up to us like, so what do you think the secrets of the pyramids are? It was so funny, right? And we were there till midnight last night.
Wow.
But, this is an emerging and evolving story that is going to, I believe, sweep the world. I think it's going to dramatically shift how we see ourselves. And this knowledge that we're learning is going to dramatically shift how we look at our history.
Well, I think that's what you're so gifted at, is right. You are literally decoding these clues from our ancient history to unlock what is possible in our future. And I love the way that you think about time as, the snake that's eating itself, the Ouroboros, that it's just, the future is the past and the past is the future. But I just want to give people a little bit of a context of, and I'm going to give the very Cliff's Notes of your
Sure, go
show
ahead.
on
Hmm.
Gaia.
Hmm.
That is basically like how you discovered all of this. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to try and sum it up. So basically you and Leonardo da Vinci have a connection, right? Like he would
Hmm.
like come to you into your dreams. You have been studying his art and his paintings, and the Vitruvian Man, right? Which is everyone will see like the circle, the square with the man. You were mapping that alongside the pyramids and noticing that the chambers inside of the pyramids were lining up with the chakras on the Vitruvian Man, and you noticed that there was no throat chakra. There was like no
No
tomb,
throat chamber. Yeah.
no throat chamber. And so then you
But there's
went
a
in,
line. Hmm.
and when I just discovered a new chamber inside of the pyramids of this one of the most studied structures in human history, and yet there was this throat, like a chamber where the throat chakra was. And
Yeah, it's just been announced recently. And it's exactly where we predicted it would be on our show Codex season 1. And that's what I said. I'm like, okay, there's going to be a chamber because, and maybe just pull it back a little bit.
yep.
So the reason why I was looking at Vitruvian Man is because the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most iconic, well-known images, right, in the world. And I was drawing it. Oh, okay, well, here we go. I actually have one right here.
Oh, cool. Good, great.
Right. I was noticing something about it that I thought was interesting because I thought, why is it that Leonardo put the square at the same base as the circle? Right? Normally you would take the square and put it over the center of the circle so they would share the same center point. But they don't, right? The square, if I make an X to find the center point across the square, it's going to be right over the groin, right? And the circle is right at the navel. So it's right at the navel, the center of the circle. So there's this distance right here, which is 1/14 of the man. And Da Vinci, in the writing up on top, writes that he cut his man into 14 parts. So if you look at the drawing, he put lines across the groin, which kind of seem out of place. It's not part of the anatomy. He put a line across the chest. He put a line at the throat, a line at the nose, a line at the forehead, and then at the top of the head. And then he's got lines at the wrists, at the elbows, and at the shoulders. Okay? And then he talks about cutting his man into 14 parts. Now, this is a reference to a very, very famous mythological story in Egypt about the death of Osiris by his brother, who murdered him for sleeping with his wife. And he cut him into 14 parts. Okay? And then another thing we noticed is that on the picture of Vitruvian Man, there are 3 diamond shapes at the top of his abdomen that nobody notices. It didn't even make it in this little sculpture thing. But there's 3 diamond shapes that match exactly the Orion constellation. And Osiris, the man cut into 14 parts, is represented in the sky by Orion constellation. So Osiris is Orion. So wait a minute. And then you look more closely at some other things. The eye, the left eye of Osiris, or a Vitruvian Man, is very dark, right, with a very large pupil. And the right eye is a very small pupil with a very large whiteness around it. So it looks kind of offset, like it's like, why does he have a pupil super dilated in one eye and the other eye not dilated at all? It's like, looks like he's looking at something bright because his right eye is looking at the sun, the eye of Ra, which is the sun, and the left eye is looking at the moon, the eye of Horus. So we've got the belt stars, and then I looked at, and I said, well, what happens if I looked at from the center of the circle, and I looked to see what the angle of this line, so straight line from the upper corner of the square to the center of the circle over the navel, and I found that it was the exact same slope angle as the Great Pyramid. 51.85 degrees. So this is why he put it at the same base as the circle. So then I overlaid the pyramid into the square and into the circle, into the top of the circle. And when I did that, all the chambers lined up, and I did this work with Alan Green, all the chambers of the Great Pyramid lined up perfectly to all the lines that he drew on the body.
Wild. What did you do in that moment when the two of you discovered that? Like, did you have take
We were
tequila
like,
shots? Did you do a
honestly, we
happy
were like,
dance?
wow! We couldn't believe it. Because I had drawn out, when I do my drawings, I drew this same Vitruvian man, and I had drawn it out and drawn circles. And I was like, why am I feeling the need to draw circles here up his body? And I thought it must be his chakra points, right? And then I had already known that the pyramid slope angle was embedded within it, right? And just incidentally, just so you know, you probably don't know this, we went to Abu Rawash, which is 8 kilometers north of the Great Pyramid Complex. It was 300 feet higher elevation. One of the pyramids there is the same on the dollar bill, right? It's a steep pyramid with a 67.4 degree angle. Well, turns out if you just connect the top of this circle right here to the base of this square, that's the pyramid that's made.
Wow.
Exactly the 67.4 degree angle, Philosopher's Stone pyramid. So we've got several things encrypted in this now. And there was some super advanced mathematics because this was before the Euler number, the transcendental Euler number, irrational number, which is a pair to pi. It makes squares while pi makes circles. And the area of this square is the Euler number when the radius of the circle is 1, and the area of the circle is pi. So you've got masculine square, feminine circle. So it's a different type of squaring the circle, because everyone looked at this and said, it's not even close to squaring the circle. What was Leonardo thinking? Squaring the circle is going to match the area of the square and the circle, or at least match the perimeter of the square with the circumference of the circle. He did neither. So it was enigmatic. For somebody who is a student of mathematics, you would say, wait, he didn't even come close to squaring the circle. What was the ratio? Well, the ratio between the two was the Euler and pi numbers, which are the two most important mathematical constants. So I'm like, geez, and this was 200 years before Euler was discovered. What's going on, right? That's just bizarre. So when we overlaid the pyramid and we found that it had all this esoteric, occulted knowledge, occulted just means hidden, as if it's encrypted through time, then we matched up each of the chambers and we said, well, he's got like 5 more lines on here that don't have chambers. Does that mean that the pyramid has more chambers that we haven't found yet? Like a map. And the answer was yes. And we found the first one now.
And you
but
think
still
there's
there's several more.
Wow.
Yeah. And each one of those chambers represents us finding within ourselves our own chakra. So it's not a coincidence. We went there to open the throat chakra, and then they just announced that throat chakra chamber, they didn't call it the throat chakra chamber, but it was exactly the same spot that I said, with a new grand gallery that we had called when we were on the trip. I said there was going to be a new grand gallery, and we were calling it the Magnum Opus Gallery. Leading to the 5th chakra, which is the throat, for the 5th dimensional experience.
And we certainly had a 5th dimensional experience. And what was so fascinating is how much singing, like how much toning, singing, chanting that was happening. And I'll even speak from my own personal experience. Even having been on Broadway for my first career, there was a reclamation of my voice and my singing that happened on that trip that I feel so grateful for, and I've been using and teaching in a different way, like more clear on my purpose, which is to bring the frequency of heaven to earth, like since that trip in Egypt. And I know that it really indelibly changed so many of us. And the other magic that happened for me in the King's Chamber that night was definitely like this dance between the masculine and feminine. And so I'd love to talk about the activation that we did on the last day, the pyramid that you just mentioned, the one that I don't think many people know about, that was made out of rose quartz, that was apparently like the crown chakra. So if this was the throat, we went to the crown. And I'd love for you to just give us like a quick history of what that is. And then I'd love to talk about, you invited me to do an activation there. And I actually did it based on what you had taught me on your podcast. So, so can you, what do we need to know about Abu Rawash? And like, I'm fascinated by the fact that it was rose quartz. I'm fascinated by the fact that it blew up. Like,
Well, I've learned a lot. Actually, you guys will be the first to hear about this because this is going to end up on Ancient Civ. We're going to do 2 episodes
okay,
on Ancient Civ on Gaia
great.
on this topic, and it's very exciting. So I was fascinated because I saw a map that was in Florence from 1457, and the map was by a cartographer by the name of Fra Mauro, Italian guy. So this is pre-Christopher Columbus, by almost 40 years. And basically what the map had that was interesting was a map of the known world at the time. And it was taken from the perspective of looking up from the center of the world, which would be around the Mediterranean, or maybe he lived in Italy, so he just went straight up into the sky in his own mind, and then drew a map all around that, right, with the Earth. And so you could see Egypt, and you could see all the countries. Tartaria is also listed on there, and there's all kinds of different, civilizations that are listed there. It was the known world in the year 1457. And I of course, went straight to Egypt because I wanted to see what was there. And I noticed 2 things that were very bizarre. One was the name of the Nile River was not Nile. It was another name called Gihon. So Gihon River is a reference from the Bible that talks about the river that flows out of and gushes out of the Garden of Eden.
Mm.
So I was like, wait a minute. It's like this missing Gihon River. You got to find that if you're going to find the Garden of Eden. And the other thing I noticed was that instead of 3 pyramids around Giza, there were 5. So what's he trying to tell us? That there's missing pyramids, possibly. So that sent me down a rabbit hole. I started looking around. And the other thing that was happening at the same time was I realized that I had done this full analysis on the slope angles of each of the pyramids. So I noticed that the builders used a particular angle of 51.85 degrees, that same one that was embedded in this, 51.85 degrees from the navel to the tip of the square, the corner. And I also noticed that the Khafre pyramid, the second one on the Giza Plateau, had a 53.13 degree angle, and Menkaure had a 51.34 degree angle, all very different angles.
Mm-hmm.
And we're told that it's a father, a grandson, father, son, and a grandson who make these pyramids. So, but why would the grandson, unless he squandered his fortune, build a much smaller pyramid than his father and his grandfather? No one's going to do that, right? Unless you really did lose some money. And so what I started noticing is that it was all musical intervals, and that the pyramids actually make a sound that we are experiencing with our eyes, and the sound that we experience with our eyes is da 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 da. It's a major chord.
A sound that we experience with our eyes. And is that geometry?
Yeah, geometry is the sound we experience with our eyes. And so I was, fascinated because I was thinking, what's going to be this sound? Well, it turns out that only certain proportions of the height over the base of right triangles will give you those exact slope angles that I just rattled off to you. So I wanted to understand what was the intention behind it. What's the intentionality there? And it turns out that 8 of the first 13 musical intervals in music that make up a scale were accounted for just with Giza Plateau, those 3 pyramids. And then another pair was taken over by looking at the proportions of the entire plateau itself. So then this starts to challenge the notion that maybe these pyramids were built in closer time proximity than we thought.
That it wasn't
It'd be
3
hard to get
generations
someone.
that built it, but actually they might have
Yeah,
been built in the
it's
same time.
representing a scale. So then I was thinking, well, there's other notes that are missing because there's 13 on the scale. So therefore, maybe I should go back and see if there's other pyramids that match the perfect slope angles. And it turns out that the major second in music and the minor seventh matched the Saqqara Djoser pyramid. So then there was still a missing one, which was the minor third and the major sixth. So I searched high and low, and then I found this place that had 2 exploded pyramids. One of them had a measured value of 67.4 degrees, which is the same as the Da Vinci proportion. From here up to the center creates a line that's going to be 67.4 from the base. The other one had a 60 degree angle. And those are both very steep pyramids, and they both sit 300 feet higher than the Great Pyramid. So if you're standing on the Giza Plateau, the pyramid that you would think to probably bow down to the most is the one that would have been, looming over the Giza Plateau at 600 feet high, a full 120 feet higher than the current Great Pyramid's total height. And with a 60-degree angle of ascent, that would have looked really, really, powerfully menacing in a way, like massive.
And made out of rose quartz.
And made out of rose granite, which is 55% rose quartz. So the most expensive stone, the Great Pyramid is not made out of that. Only the sarcophagus and parts of the pyramid are made out of that, where there requires the highest degree of resonance. When you look at the other pyramids, even Menkaure, it only has a base that's made out of granite. The whole pyramid, the rest of it is made out of Tura limestone. So now you've got two pyramids that were at Abu Rawash that are both referred to as the Djed Efre pyramids. And the Djed references the same stuff we were just talking about, which is this notion of the Djed pillars and raising the Kundalini life force through powerful incantations and ceremonial magic, as well as alchemy. Part of it involving the sexual act itself. So this was a plateau that I believe was really representative of the crown chakra, because the shape of the pineal gland is the same as this pyramid that has this sharp angle of 67.4, the same one with the Eye of Providence on the back of the dollar bill. And then I counted the number of blocks on the back of the dollar bill and matched it with the remaining concourses that did not explode when they were destroyed. And it was a perfect match. So there was clearly some esoteric and hidden knowledge that was tied into all of this.
And why do you think it exploded?
That's anybody's guess. I believe that what we're really looking at, if you look at the original name of what we now refer to today as Cairo, which, by the way, when pronounced by the Greeks would not be Cairo, but surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly to you, it's actually pronounced Hero.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, right? So, and Cairo can also mean Toro, because the X was used synonymously with the Tau. So Taurus, hero, right? So it was, I think what I believe is that the original name of Cairo, or Hero, was actually Babylon. And if you read the Bible and some of the ancient texts, it talks about that the place where Babylon was built by a fellow by the name of Nimrod, who was also known as Orion and Enoch, was supposedly on the banks of the river Gihon, which today scholars believe that Babylon was somewhere in Mesopotamia. But there's really no foundational basis or evidentiary basis that backs that up. Why? Because in the story of the Bible, which, it's one of the oldest books in the world, and whether we like the interpretation or not, you have to at least respect it as some form of a recording, whether of allegory or of reality. It doesn't really matter in this context yet. But this place, Babylon, was supposed to have been built on the banks of the river Gihon, the Gihon River. So that means that what we think of today as Mesopotamia, as Babylon, may not be correct. Now, if you look at the story of who was this Nimrod who built the Tower of Babel and who built Babylon, which even today, Cairo, there's a whole big section of Cairo called Babylon. And when Leonardo da Vinci went to work for the Sultan, he wrote a letter to the Lieutenant Devedar of the Sultan of Babylon. That's how it was titled. They called it even then. In Jesus' day, there was no Cairo or Hero. It was referred to as Babylon. So Jesus and his parents lived there for quite some time when they had the extermination order from Herod for all the firstborn male children. So I started looking at this and saying, well, wait, who was the father of this Enoch / Nimrod character, who's also known as Orion by the constellation? Some believe he's good, some believe he's bad. Some believe that he got his bow and arrow from God himself. So what's the real story here? And what you find is that this person wanted to build a tower to heaven. It would have been the tallest tower in the world. And it represented the crown chakra. And at that time, we apparently had one language to communicate with each other. One language. And then all of a sudden, we lost the ability to communicate. Maybe that one language was telepathic. We don't know. What we do know is that both Herodotus and Josephus, the two biggest historians from the ancient, world, said that Gihon River was the Nile River, and that the father of Orion / Nimrod / Enoch was a fellow by the name of Cush. Cush is a reference to the Cushite people. He was the founder of the Cushite people. The Cushite people never lived in Mesopotamia. They lived in southern Egypt and Sudan, as well as in Eritrea and Ethiopia and Somalia. So what we got is our history, and we're told that it's based on a ziggurat, may not be actually factually correct. And so what we're finding now is that the Tower of Babel might actually have been at Abu Rawash. And it matches the description much better than any other possible candidate for it, because it sits 300 feet higher elevation. If you're going to build something that's going to extend to the high heavens, you're going to build it on the best plateau around so you could save yourself some work.
Sure. And so just refreshing my memory from the Bible, the Tower of Babel was like, okay, we're building a tower all the way to heaven. God didn't like that. And so we're like, wait, we're breaking this down. And not only are we going to break this down so you don't try and get to heaven, but we're now going to have you all speak different languages.
Yeah, so let's say that maybe at that point in time, we had a perfect use of our pineal and pituitary glands.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we lost that ability, and there was a solar flare that exploded this pyramid, and everyone would just say, oh, God did it. Right? Or maybe we chose it all. And I tend to believe in the latter. It's part of this grand history, this grand story that we're telling ourselves, in effect. And I'm excited about it because I think we're going to get the evidence that's going to show that what we think of as Babylon in the ancient world, there were two Babylons. There was a truly ancient Babylon that was built by the Cushite people and by Nimrod and Enoch. So who would have been the grandson, and his progeny would have been the grandchildren of not only Enoch but also of Noah. But I think what is going to happen is that our whole perception on Mesopotamia as being that breadbasket, sort of the fertile crescent of what we think of as sort of like the upspringing of humanity, is probably not correct. So this is why it's quite interesting, because this is actually matching the story. There's no history of Cushites being in Mesopotamia or in Persia.
It's like another example of, as we decode our history, we can change our future. And I feel like, again, that's what we were doing in that. So we're in these ruins, just to give people a little window in. You brought us to this rose quartz tallest pyramid in Egypt. It's been exploded. Now it's just like a pile of this rose granite, rose quartz. But we went down into this cave, did this beautiful sound activation. Our friends sang, did prayers, invocations. And then as we're going up to the top, you asked if I would do a prayer, an invocation on the top to activate the crown. I was like, yes, absolutely, would love to. And so as I was walking up, I was like, oh, I should do the lifegasm breath. So the lifegasm breath is something that I teach inside of Sacred Secret, but it wasn't until I was a guest on your podcast, Think Tank, that I understood the Hall of Brahman inside of the brain, and that I understood the masculine and feminine. So I would just love to hear that from your mouth. Like, can you just explain that phenomenon of what's happening with that balance of masculine and feminine inside of the brain?
Sure. So, It's funny because it's represented as well by my logo thing here that I chose like 5 years ago or so, which represents the blue is feminine and the red is masculine normally. And normally it would be oriented like this, right? And normally it would be with two triangles, but I knocked off the corners because I didn't feel the corners matched. I got this hit that I needed to knock off the corners to soften it, more like two hearts
Yeah.
interlocking,
Uh-huh.
right? The diamonds. And so in this one, I have it actually this orientation where the masculine is pointed downward and the feminine is pointed outward because it represents this greater depth of integration. Well, this is what we're really trying to get towards, right? So I mentioned earlier that the left brain is the seat of mathematics and the right brain is the seat of music, and that language and geometry are somewhere in the middle of those two. Well, once you understand that you can connect both hemispheres of the brain through this hemisynchronization method, this changes everything because now the rational mind is able to work with a partner that's super intuitive rather than just shutting it off and not listening to it.
Which is what we've been doing in society for tens of thousands of years. It's time to integrate, y'all. It is
That's
time to
right.
integrate.
And by the same token, it's like on the other side, the intuitive mind can learn to respect and value the rational mind,
Yes.
right? Rather than just complaining to each other. It's like, oh, you always bitch at me for this, that, and the other, right? It's like, no, we're going to work together. We're going to be a team. And that's really what this is about. And so when you get into the sex alchemy in union process, you have to find the way, and it's hidden in esoterica, but you can learn it from people, like Emily and myself. You have to find the way to be able to lift the part of the brain, which includes, like the pituitary gland, which sits lower than does the pineal gland. You need to bring them into the same plane. And the only way to do that is by breathing. So as you breathe in, it's kind of like when we're breathing in and out. If you looked at a cine fluoroscopy of your heart, you would see your heart pumping in and out, and it's going to be in conjunction with your lungs pumping in and out, right? It's all connected. The same is true. We don't often see it this way, but the same is true for our brains. Our brains change and contract and move positions and everything based on our breathing patterns. So what I realized was that I could breathe in and move up my pituitary gland, which is my feminine aspect. So rising the feminine, so to speak, to bring it to the same equal level as the pineal gland. And that once those two touch, right, literally touch, like in the story of Michelangelo that he's got on the ceiling at the Sistine Chapel, where God reaches out to Adam and they're touching, forming a mirror between the two. And then if you look at God, God is inside of a curtain that's shaped like a brain. And if you look at the woman that's in his arms, she's forming an X with his body. So he's like leaning forward this way, and she's leaning the opposite direction. So if his back is here, she's going this way, it's forming an X. Literally forms an X. So of course I wanted to understand why would, Da Vinci want to do that? Why is there this whole, and why would Michelangelo, why would Da Vinci, why would all these painters paint this masculine and feminine relationship the way they did? And the reason is because it was linked directly to the optic chiasm. So our left eye connects to our right hemisphere of our brain, and our right eye connects to our left. And they connect through the optic nerve that then meets up with the occipital lobe in the back of the brain. And then something that is totally in the dark has the ability to perceive photons of light. Because it's traveling down, you can think of it like a little fiber optic, right? And now the information is there, so you can, be able to display things inside your mind in your outside world, right? But if you're only looking through your left eye of rational thought, you're going to miss a lot of stuff that's in the world around you. And if you're only looking through the left eye of your irrational thought, you're likewise going to miss a lot of stuff. You won't even be able to interpolate what it is that you're perceiving. You might not even realize that you've been perceiving the world through your biased lenses of perception your whole life. Because you might just think, no, I see it this way and everyone should see it this way, because what I believe is gospel and what I believe is the paradigm that's correct. All the rest is false. And we all do this without even recognizing it. So what is the purpose of this? The purpose is to bring the energy of masculine and feminine into equilibrium, into perfect balance, allowing them to exchange information, right? And those two pyramids on the Jedi Foray platform and plateau are there because they represent the Jed. And what I'm talking about is the raising of the Jed pillar. The two Kundalini snakes that come up and meet in balance, Ida and Pingala, and the staff of Hermes. And I think that's the reason for all of this, that we are now moving into an age, an era, where it's becoming increasingly important to have the ability to merge consciousness with our subconscious mind. And that's another way to look at the feminine aspect. If you're a man, you have a conscious mind. It's what you know that you are. And your subconscious, the reason why it's going to be an anima or an animus relationship, just like Carl Jung says, is if you think about it, if you're perceiving yourself as a man, then your opposite, shadow, is going to be a female, right? It's like your absorption versus your reflection. It's still you. It's not separate from you. But you'll encounter that person. And so as you start to encounter that person, and for a man to encounter a woman or a woman to encounter a man in this type of union, then they will start enter into tantric practices. And the tantric practices are inclusive of breath work. The breath work is intended to bring your brain into this hall of Brahman, or the wedding hall. It's also referred to as the hypothalamus, the thalamus, right? It's this fleshy part of the center of the brain that's right in the center of the corpus callosum, which connects both sides of the brain. So now you're creating this canopy of electricity, so that now all the things that you cannot perceive with your five senses, you could perceive through that hall of Brahman. It's an expanded awareness, and this is, how you can achieve a higher state of awareness, and then eventually you'll get a hole in the top of your head, right? Which sounds funny, but it's called a Brahmanandra. After you've achieved this, the energy seeks to go out of your head, and so you've got a place in your brain where the skull fuses together as a child, but there's still a lot of tissue there, and eventually it pops. And for me, it did. It popped. It was very loud. It happened in the middle of the night, and I knew I was going to get this big bloody nose. And I immediately got up and ran to the bathroom and got tissue paper because I had a huge bloody nose.
Wow.
And then the next day, about the next day or two after, I was like feeling my head, and I'm like, what the heck? There's like a hole in the top of my head. And it's soft.
But this is what you see in all of certainly the ancient Indian iconography, oftentimes in the Buddhist iconography. It's like we have the spine, we have those snakes coming up, like you said, those Kundalini snakes, and then you have this lotus flower blooming on the top of the head, opening on the top of the head. And this is again I guess yes, maybe the flower is a metaphor for the actual opening that is happening on the skull, because the energy gets so high that it wants to be released.
By the way, that's not your best pickup line, if that's what your intent is, right? It's like, hey, baby, let's go put a hole in the top of your head.
Yeah, maybe if you're like a kink bar or something. Maybe someone's into that.
Yeah. It's like, wait, you don't have a hole in the top of your head? Come back to my place.
But I'm curious to know, because this is at the core of so much of the work that I'm doing at Ziva, and certainly with Sacred Secret, is to help people to turn up the dial on their own divinity. And I talk about this because, when you do that breath, and then you secrete that melatonin, which is the precursor to DMT, right? You're making more of this God particle inside of your brain, quite literally becoming more divine, more powerful, more creative. I'm curious to know, what do you think would happen if more people were able to do this, to raise up their feminine, to bring their masculine and feminine in balance, to have this union inside of themselves? If we were able to do that on the inside, what do you think would be the ripple effect on Earth?
Look, I don't believe that the world's a difficult place. I've said this many times. I'll keep saying it. I don't think it's a difficult place because people hate each other as much as it's a difficult place because people hate themselves. I think what would shift if everybody and more people did this, And they did it also while embracing the aspects of themselves that they formerly did not like. You know, I heard something the other day, which was from Alyssa Nobriga, which you know.
Yeah.
And she said something that it had a profound impact on me, and I've been thinking about it since we met for a podcast. And she said, if you want to experience, the feeling of feeling loved, then embrace the feeling of not feeling loved. And taking the opposite aspect and the thing that you are fearing the most, embrace it rather than fearing it. What we resist is what will persist. So I think that the more human beings that enter into this kind of divine union, it's really just a metaphor for them finding the love within themselves. So this is why, sometimes I get a little bit testy, I guess, when I hear that, some people will be like, oh, no, I'm never going to have, and maybe it's because of my own bad experience with, oh, I don't have premarital sex, so I end up in South Korea, right? It's like, this is what happens. But
I think a lot
I
of
would
people
say
aren't having
this, that,
postmarital sex either.
yeah, I would say this, that you want to find that special partner and be able to share this expression because it's not separate from you. That special partner is a reflection of you. And the moment that you're actually no longer in resistance to whatever will come is the moment that that wisdom keeper aspect of you will appear.
Can you say that
You know,
again? I don't
if
understand.
I'll put it in another sense, right? So if you need to get a loan from a bank, is that a good time to get a loan from a bank?
No.
If you walk in the bank and say, I need a loan, I'm starting a new business, give me a loan. The bank looks at you like, no way. Instead, if you just go and do your life and you get successful and everything, and then every once in a while, you haven't taken on any credit or anything, and all of a sudden you get a letter from the bank saying, oh, we'd like to give you credit, right? What we resist persists. Everything that we put as separate from us will continue to be separate from us. We will attract everything we judge until we no longer judge everything we attract.
Ooh, one more
So
time. We
people
will
that,
judge everything we attract until we no longer attract everything that we judge, or flip
other
that.
way around, we will judge everything we attract
Uh-huh.
until we no longer judge everything that we did attract. We will attract everything we judge until we no longer judge that which we attracted. It's a function of us being able to step outside of this and realize that everybody that you meet, every experience that you have can be a divine communication and can be a step up into a new, expanded version of you, gaining more and more empathy and love, not condition. The more conditions you place on other things and people, the more conditions you will experience.
And conditions to your own self-love.
Yeah, that's right. So I saw a meme the other day that I thought was priceless because it said something like, oh, this guy keeps complaining about encountering assholes in his life, but he doesn't realize that it's because he's an asshole. It's like, be the change you want to see in the world. You want to be loving and caring and live in a world of loving and caring people and everything, then be the loving and caring person. It's like, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It's the same context. Ask not what your partner can do for you, ask what you could do for your partner. Instead of always placing condition. Do it freely and you will find that it will come back to you tenfold. The times in my life when I let go of my desires and attachments are the moments that I finally experience true freedom and abundance. When I stopped giving a shit.
You got a healthy dose of fuck it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with how people can or cannot or do not validate you. The more validation you seek from people, it's kind of funny. It becomes even more elusive to you.
Amen.
The way you get the validation is by not desiring it, not focusing on it. Then all of a sudden it finds you. You ever notice that the things that you basically run after somehow become elusive to you the moment you start running after them? It's like a big giant game of chase and hide and go seek. It doesn't need to be this way.
But do you think that that game of chase and hide and seek is keeping us, like, to keep us in that game of detachment, to keep coming back to I
Yeah.
have everything I need?
Yes. And we will continue to experience the same learnings over and over and over again until we finally learn it. And it will get more and more intense until we finally learn it. It's like, whoa, that gave me a big smackdown this time. Yeah, well, wait till next time because you didn't really fully learn it yet.
Yeah.
Nothing is separate from each one of us. All of us are just reflections and divisions of a number one that has been separated infinite number of times in our perception. And all of us exist for the beautiful purpose of being able to perceive the one through our unique eyes of perception and vision that never have existed and will never yet again exist. And the one then becomes more wise as it accumulates a beautiful Akashic record of information on how to love itself.
I love that so much, that we're here to increase the amount of ways that nature can love herself, or that the
Yes.
one can love itself. Yes.
And wisdom is the accumulation of this ability to have empathy. And if we think we're in a matrix or a simulation and therefore we don't have a need to feel empathy, then we miss the entire point of the whole thing. The whole thing is about us learning empathy for each of the different varying perspectives. First, it's the realization that what we thought was a fact is actually just a facet of a larger prism of truth. Then secondly, we're faced with the challenge of choosing to express love rather than just be right. How many relationships got blown up because somebody was recalcitrant, intransigent over being right?
God, I love it. I love being right so much. My therapist, when I was 25, he looked at me, he's like, you can either be happy or you can be right. And I was like, I will choose right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Oh, I love it when I just love the way that you articulate these beautiful truths in such a matter of fact way. And I have 85,000 things I want to ask you. So I'm going to start to speed it up. Because I want to talk mushrooms. I want to talk sex and psychedelics. I want to talk aliens. I want to talk the pyramid connection. I want to Teotihuacan. So I think let's start with mushrooms, right? So psilocybin, psychedelics, and I sort of asked you jokingly at the beginning of, I asked you a real question at the beginning of the podcast, and I was like, Robert, what's the moment that you had where you found something so good, where you thought, why isn't everyone doing this? And you said, mushroom sex.
Mushroom sex. Yeah.
I was like, look, I'm happy to title the episode Sex and Psychedelics, but we've talked about that a lot on the show. I feel like you have other areas of expertise. And yet you said something when we were in Egypt. You said mushrooms don't make you see that which is not there. They allow you to see things as they really are. And so I'm just curious what your relationship with psilocybin has been and how it's changed your perception or widened your perception, and how it's deepened your relationship with math and geometry.
You know, it's interesting. So I grew up in Nebraska. Well, I grew up in England, but then we moved to Nebraska when I was in high school. And they scared the shit out of everybody
Who's
when
they?
it came to my high school did.
Okay.
Like they had like we'd all go to the gym and we're like, what's going on? We're doing this, meeting in the bleachers and everyone's there. And they show these videos what happens if you smoke like one joint.
Totally. The war on drugs.
And it's like, it's like, here's your brain. There's like an egg, and then here's your brain on drugs out of frying pan.
Frying pan.
Yeah, it scared the piss out of everybody, right? There's this whole war on drugs. And so I was always terrified of drugs, to be honest.
Sure.
Like, and I do have a funny story. This is actually hilarious. I'll tell this one real quick. So one of my very, very close friends is this guy that I've been in YPO with for 20 years, Young Presidents Organization. And I had just left Allergan. I got recruited to be CEO of Bausch & Lomb Surgical. It was a big company. And I was 40 years old.
Wow.
So I'm like living the dream. I was president of Allergan Medical. I was like living the dream, multi-billion-dollar thing. And like I said, I was thriving in this world of earth, right? And I thought, I'm pretty awesome. So I thought, okay, I could finally relax a little bit. I just got this big new job. I've got a month off just to do whatever the hell I want to do. I'm not working for anyone. I'm not like a slave to anybody, nothing. And of course, one of my friends is like kind of big time into cannabis and drugs, and I never did it with him. So I finally, like, he one day we're at his house and he's like smoking out of a Pepsi can or something, you know? And it was like so raunchy. So
Just the
raunchy. And
aluminum
he's like,
alone.
here, do it. You don't work for anyone. He's Israeli. He's like, you don't work for anyone now. Come on, you should do this now. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I did it, succumbed to the peer pressure. And I took a few hits on this thing. And, I was like, whoa, okay, wow. And then the next day I did something similar again because he's like, come on, you should do this now. You're not working for anyone. So that's when the private equity fund that owned Bausch and Lomb reached out to me and said, hey, we forgot. We need to do a drug test on you.
You're like, my high school was right. It's going to ruin my life.
So I'm like, I've never told this story. So I was like shitting my pants, like dying, because I'm thinking, okay, so I look up like, okay, what's the test? So I had to get two tests. One was a urine test, and this was like a few days after, right? Maybe 2 or 3 days after. And I have to get a urine test. I have to get a hair test. And then I start reading about the hair test and how like you'll have marijuana in your hair, THC in your hair for 7 years. Right? So I'm like having nightmares at night about going in for this test because it had already been announced to the world this big job change I was having. And it was going to ruin my career and everything. And I'm like calling my friend. I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And he's like, well, he's like really into this stuff. He's like, you could, shave your body. So I'm imagining myself with like no eyebrows, no hair, every hair on my body is shaved. It's like, yeah, I have like, some sort of pattern alopecia, I don't know. And so I was dying, right? I was dying. So finally I muster up the courage to go and do a trial test, right? Without doing it so that it's going to go to the new company. And so luckily, it was in this sweet spot because it doesn't grow in your hair and in your fingernails for like a week and a half or something. And I was right in that sweet spot. And the urine test doesn't work after like 3 days, 2 or 3 days. So I went and got tested and I like passed. And I was like, okay, I want another test right now. And here's the form. So,
Oh, I'm so glad it worked out for you.
oh my God, it was so funny, right? So I was always kind of traumatized over drugs, right? And I never really felt the desire, and I never was a big drinker either. Probably because I was Mormon until I was 31, and I grew up without coffee. I grew up without, I like tea just fine, but I grew up without all these things that everyone was sort of used to doing, and I was like, okay, I'm free of these things right from the very beginning, so I'll drink maybe once a month or something, nothing, like very, very little. And I never felt the need for any kind of substances, ever. And then I was introduced to mushrooms. And I was like, okay, this is wild. The first time I was on a retreat with a bunch of my friends out in the desert. And I did it. And I had a very high threshold also for marijuana. Like it never got me high. I never get really high. And I didn't feel that much on mushrooms the first time. Well, then the next time I upped the dose and I definitely noticed. and I remember, it's like mushrooms don't give you an illusion. They reveal the illusion. So one of the first things I started noticing was that the walls had like the flower of life structure behind them, not just the walls, but everything. And I could see the flower of life structure behind everything. And it was beautiful because it wasn't just one layer of flower of life. It was like a fractal pattern infinitely of flower of life. And I could see it in all these different colors. And it was everywhere I would look. And now I could still see them even when I don't take mushrooms. Right? So all it did was it opened up a new aspect for me. It was like the first time I've only ever tried, narcotics like once. I tried it
What are you
with,
defining
it
as
was
narcotics?
like Coke, right?
Okay.
I tried Coke once.
Me too. I did it
And,
one time.
huh?
I did it one time.
Yeah, I did it once. I was in Medellin, when in Rome. It's like, I was in Medellin, Colombia, and they're like, "You got to do this." I'm like, "Okay, I'll try it once." And so, they were like, "You got to find a naked ass somewhere and snort it off a naked ass." And so this was like a bachelor party. So of course I had a wild life. What could I say? So I did, and the only side effect I got from it was immediately, and I don't know anyone else that this has happened to, I could see auras.
Yeah, it's not a usual side effect of cocaine that you hear.
No, this must have been some really good shit.
Yeah.
And like literally, I could see like a full on afro around people's heads of their aura colors. I
Wow.
could read auras. And ever since then, I could. So it never went away.
Cool.
It never went away. Once I recognized how to do it while I was, on it that night, and I only literally snorted like 2 lines, I think it was nothing. And then I never did it again. I didn't like the way that made me feel, which was, it sent my heart kind of racing, and I just didn't feel comfortable with it.
Hmm.
But mushrooms was very different because mushrooms is very heart opening.
Hmm.
It's expanding, and it gave me an expanded view of perception, and it actually makes you smarter.
Hmm.
It actually makes you smarter in the right kind of smart, not imbalanced logos smart, but balanced logos and pathos smart.
Yes, that union we've been talking about of the intellect and the
Hmm.
intuition, that left brain and right. And it's similar to what happens on meditation. You look at a brain on meditation or a brain on mushrooms, it's just similar, like they light up. The regions that are having energy and electricity are wider than when we're just in our regular waking state.
Yeah, and when you do it in the context of the sex act, right, which is union ceremony, it's a sacred experience, and it's tantric. It lasts several hours, um, and for me, it was life changing,
Mm.
truly life changing. You're in union with yourself in a way, and then you can actually go, and you don't need mushrooms to do this, but it definitely helps. You can actually go to another spirit realm, which is described by Buddhists as Shambhala. Like literally, you go into, once you raise the Kundalini and you find the balance of these two, you get into this cave of Brahman, the wedding hall, then you'll start to focus and see a spinning cube. It starts off as a black cube that then starts spinning very fast and becomes transparent. And then within it, you see a Merkaba that's
Mm.
basically anchoring the corners of the cube, right? And then it's like an elevator. So you feel it call to you to go inside of it. So you direct your consciousness inside of it, and you do this with a partner. And then you literally go up this elevator.
And are you in the same cube or are you each in your own cubes?
You're in the same cube. And what's interesting about this, when you're doing it the right way, then everything that you see without even saying it, they can also see.
Mm.
So you end up in this other world. And after you do this enough times, you start to grow like a ring cell stone. Like ring cell stones are crystals that grow in your heart. But we have 3 places that the crystals grow. One is in the heart, and I talk about this on my show on Codex in season 1. I think it's episode 8, where the ring cell stone is something that a Buddhist monk or someone who's been on a spiritual path will get cremated, and then they'll search through the ashes of the cremation and try to find these little stones that look like amber beads. And then they put them in these little jars and they place them in holy places and keep the place very clean because they represent the purity that this High Lama had achieved in the lifetime.
Wow.
So the larger the beads, the more, and the heavier the weight of those beads, the more purity they've achieved in what's left over. I think there's some sort of analogy related back to the weighing of the heart as well,
Mm.
which is an Egyptian thing that's all about kind of like comparing against the feather and all this. But I think the metaphor of it, we don't fully grasp yet, right, as society. The other place that a crystal grows is in your thalamus. It becomes the knob on the staff of Hermes.
Mm.
So the spine is the Sushumna. You have the Ida and the Pingala. It comes up through each of the activations of each of the chakras, and you do this during the sex act. And then it basically comes up to the top, and the two snakes meet, and that forms a knob right there. So a crystal grows at your thalamus, hypothalamus. And that crystal is not amber, it's tiger's eye.
Mm.
And this tiger's eye crystal is controlled, it's basically a crown chakra signification, and it's controlled by Jupiter. So it looks like the planet Jupiter, tiger's eye.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another crystal that forms. So this is your ability to see and go to realms that are like Shambhala, right? There's a whole other place with, it's like the spirit realm, and you'll meet all these other people there and everything. It's very real. I experienced it many times. And
What do you
then,
mean you'll meet other people there? Like other people who are also in that state?
yeah,
And do you think those
it's a
people are in
spirit
that
realm.
sex act, like doing that practice, and you're meeting in this other reality?
I think that other reality exists,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like this place of spiritual conflation. I think it exists. I don't think they all got there via some sex act. I think they're already there. And it's like, as soon as you come there, it's almost like you're coming home. It's the weirdest thing. And so you pick up, things that are going between these worlds. And one of the ways that is connecting the two worlds, this world of reality and that world, is music.
Mm.
Like literally, music is crossing both of those worlds.
And meditation, like it marries the right and left brain. It strengthens the corpus callosum, which is
Yes,
housing this. And music is, activates the right brain. So this is actually one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I've heard you say that the medicine of our future will not be pharmacological, it will be sound.
that's
And
right.
so I would love to have a brief window into, I know you've worked with the Dalai Lama. I know that you've spent a lot of time
hmm
basically like decoding music as it maps to human emotions, and also like the 8-tone scale, that it's limiting our human emotions because we're limited by a scale that's not the full expression of what music is capable of. And I know you're making a lot of exciting discoveries here. So can you share like a window into what does medicine as sound even mean?
So before I do that, but I will go
Mhm.
there next. I just want to finish this thought so you get
Yep.
the full piece of it. So
Yep.
the heart ring cell stone is in control of the now.
Okay.
The brain, right, which is called the Kalindra stone, is the ability to see through time differently. So when you achieve this level through this act, right, of sex alchemy, and I don't know that it can be done by yourself. I think it requires you to merge, because actually everything you do in this world is by yourself. If you think about it, because everyone is just a reflection of you. And you integrate that energy, so you have to integrate that energy so you can do it by yourself, because your entire universe is a inverse. It's a U inverse rather than a universe. Now, the place that's about the future and being able to access the past, you have to clear out the negative emotions that you've never felt, that stay accumulated in your solar plexus area.
Mm.
So once you clean that out, then you can also access past, not just future and altered state. So time goes both forward and backward at the same time. The solar plexus is what blocks us from being able to clear issues in the past. So you probably heard of a Mandela effect, right?
Mm-mm.
So a Mandela effect is when you grew up, did you ever hear of Jiffy peanut butter?
Yeah, I ate a lot of it.
Do you know there's no such thing, if you look it up, as Jiffy peanut butter?
Oh, it's just Jif.
It's just Jif. When you played Monopoly when you were younger, did the guy on the box of the Monopoly wear a monocle?
I think so, yes.
Go back and look. Now, it no longer wears a monocle. These are what's called Mandela effects. It starts off with, when Nelson Mandela, back in the early 1980s, a lot of people, millions of people, report remembering Nelson Mandela dying and watching on television a 4-hour tribute at his, funeral. He never died then. So in effect, millions of people remember a certain set of historical references that no longer seem to exist. And if you haven't watched, just look up Mandela Effect on YouTube. You'll find a ton of stuff on it. It's very, very fascinating.
So it's like
So what a
many
basic,
people having the same illusion or the same false memory.
yeah. So I don't believe that there's a different universe for every version of me that made one decision one direction and another decision the other direction. That to me doesn't comport with laws of conservation. The universe only, it's very efficient, right? The universe is extremely efficient. I mean, think about the animal kingdom and the food chain, right? It's so efficient. So it doesn't work like that, I don't believe. So, but I do believe that there are many, many, many versions of me. There is a many worlds through time. There are many incarnations of me through time. And you could say it's infinite because I could tap into any one point in time of all of those different worlds of me. And as you go into, achieving this Calendra stone and clearing out the solar plexus, then you get a cat's eye. So you have a cat's eye in the solar plexus, you have an amber stone in the heart for the now, and you have a Calendra stone in the brain. The three work together with this double torus so that you could experience time differently. You could access your former lifetimes any moment during those former lifetimes. And the first time I went to Egypt, I could access time differently even within this lifetime, and I could talk to people about what they were doing and tell them where they were, what they were doing, who they were with when they were like 14, 15 years old. I never knew them.
That would
So
happen spontaneously, or you would do it on purpose?
I would do it when they asked. So, and I did it many times. It happened spontaneously the first time because I didn't know I could do it. I just did it. And next thing I know, the guy that I'm talking to is like weeping. And because I told him that, he said to me, he says, my mother has a broken heart. He was an Egyptian man. And I said, no, he said, my mother has a sick heart. And I said, your mother doesn't have a sick heart. She has a broken heart. There's a difference. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, your father, I didn't know anything about this guy. And I said, your father died, 5 years ago. And he beat you your whole life. And you don't know the reason why he beat you. And he's like standing there, just like jaw dropped. And I said, would you like to know? And he said, yes. I said, because he despised the fact that you were gay because he himself was tempted by being gay and he didn't want to be gay. And now he's like weeping. And I said, and your brother was too. So they both ganged up on you and you got kicked out of the house. And he was just like, and this guy was one of the bosses of Giza Plateau. And I said, so your mother wanted you to reconcile with your father before he died, but then he died the week before you had a chance to reconcile with him. Because you were going to come. Because you lived down in Luxor. And I didn't know any of this stuff, but I knew all of it.
Wow.
We all have the ability to access. I came back and I have a friend named Phil Anthony, and he said, can you do it to me? Can you do it to me? And by the way, this is what Buddhist lamas do. They don't test a Buddha's lama's, a teacher's ability by seeing how they can predict the future. That's easy because it's too hard to verify. The way they do it is by verifying the past. So what they do is they actually have a setup where two lamas will sit there and say, we were talking 25 years ago, just the two of us. What were we talking about? Astral travel into that existence of time and tell us the conversation we had. This is how you go up the ladder in Tibetan Buddhism. Did you know this?
I think you might have mentioned to me on our last podcast. And
That's right, I did.
But the piece that I'm remembering is like it's easy to predict the future because you can't verify it. But if you want to verify it, you're trying to pick the next Dalai Lama, it would make sense to go back in time. And is the supposition here that if you clear that solar plexus, if you clear those like blocked traumatic emotions from the solar plexus, that activates your ability to see and feel into other realities from the past?
Yes.
And how does one do that? How does one clear the emotions from the solar plexus?
You have to feel, I remember I worked in Australia and I had this boss. I was like 25 and He said, you know, Robert, you've got amazing qualitative experience, but you don't have enough quantity of experience. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you'll realize one day that in your career, no matter how quickly you ascend the ladder of success and skip rungs on the ladder in that, sort of ascendancy, one day you'll have to come back and visit every single rung that you missed. And I didn't really realize what that meant. And it's exactly what I'm talking about now. Every emotion that we didn't feel because we suppressed it, we denied its existence, we didn't want to feel it, is what accumulates in our solar plexus. So the way to resolve it is to go back and consciously remember those things that you have literally suppressed out of your memory and allow yourself to feel and release those emotions that are stuck. It could be a very painful, difficult process, but your soul, if it's on the journey towards this path, will tell you exactly where to go. And you'll start to remember those things that you literally suppressed completely out of your memory and are in full denial of. By touching the rungs on those ladders of emotional states that you never experienced, you will open up portals within you and clear the pathway to a new existence. So I wanted to make sure I got that out to you guys. And then the
Yeah,
next
thank
part of your
you. I did
question.
not mean to cut that off, but and I just want to double click on a few things because that feels
Mhm.
so relevant and also in my humble opinion, the exact medicine that the planet needs right now. Like when I look at what's happening, it's like, oh, this is the byproduct of tens of thousands of years of us not feeling our feelings. So it's not just the individual that's seeing the impacts of this. We're seeing this collectively because we've never been taught how to feel our feelings. It's why I'm like doing this emotional alchemy work. I'm like, hey, give that rage the microphone, give that sorrow the microphone. Not only will it clear the channel for more ecstasy, but now you're arguing that it could also increase your state of consciousness to where you can access different versions of yourself, different versions of astral travel, even where we're like going through space and time, which is fascinating.
Well, and think about it, okay? If you and I were making a game, right, a virtual reality game, we'd probably think of it like making a movie. You come out of a movie theater and they have a movie reporter that comes up to you and says, "Oh, how was the How was the film?" And if it was really immersive, then you would say, "It was amazing." Oh, Avatar, the first Avatar, I walked out, I was like, wow, it was like, took me to a whole different place. I forgot who I was for like 3 hours. And that immersion was what made it so fun and cool, right? That's what's so cool about these things now, I
Oh, like
have
the
them
virtual
for the
reality
gaming stuff
headsets.
that I work on, right, in one of
Hmm.
my companies. And I'm not addicted to it or anything like that, but it's amazing because if you put it on, you take it off. It's so real. That 8K display is so realistic that it's kind of mind blowing. You can get emotional within there. So if it's, and I think it's going to totally change the way movies are experienced and everything because it's like full immersive. Like there's one scene where you're in there and Alicia Keys is singing in a studio and she's like right next to you. And you see an aromatherapy thing and you see the smoke come by you. It's like so real and super 3D, 4D, right? Because it's in motion. Well, if we were going to make a game, the rules that we would set of the game would be as follows. If I'm already God and I am omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, first rule is all those abilities are gone. Because a game playing with that as the context would be not a game anymore. It's not fun. You would take away superpowers. You wouldn't add superpowers.
Yeah.
And then you would have to earn them back over time by certain tests and trials. Right? So the other thing that you would do is you would want to make sure that you have no memory whatsoever that you created it. So it would erase your memory in totality so that you could come in this world and really play it in an immersive way. Forget who you are and be in this. And so you'd come out of it, you'd be like, that was so real. Oh my gosh. I was talking to this person the other day. They said they had a near-death experience. And in the near-death experience, they like woke up and they're in this room. There was like a white room in some machine. and all these people wearing white clothes were like, wait, what's happened? They're like, put him back in 2023. 2023.
Uh-uh.
Yes, seriously.
No.
It was so funny.
Wow.
So so each of us, right, we would want to be totally immersed in this game.
Yep.
We'd want it to be totally real. And how would you know it's totally real? The quality of the depth of the emotion that you feel. So in this illusory world, right, the only thing that becomes real is the space-time memory that's created from the emotions that we feel. The only thing that's real is what we feel. So the reason we're here is to learn to feel.
Yes.
And the most important feeling of all of that is to love and be loved. It's as simple as that. So if you're in this incredible game of your own creation, you might as well live it to the max and feel all the emotions. That's what makes it real. So the one is becoming more and more wise by dividing itself into all these eyes of perception, like a giant peacock with feathers of eyes, looking everywhere, observing itself and looking at each of the stimuli, inputs that are coming in, and from that smoke and mirrors game, deriving emotional states for each one of us through the one great song, which really is just the love that underlies it all.
I've never heard of the fractals of God experiencing itself through the peacock feathers, which I recently did a journey, and this woman said that that is my power animal, is a peacock. And she said it because people are drawn to you by your beauty
Mm-hmm.
and your showgirlness and the dancing and the singing.
Uh-huh.
But that is just like the feathers are just the thing that brings them in. What they're really coming for is the depth of the transmission. And so I love that the peacock feathers now have this depth of meaning, that it's the fractals of God experiencing itself. Ah, thank
All
you for
these
that.
many eyes looking at itself, and it's so beautiful when you look at it in that context. And then it gives meaning to all of us having all of these different experiences in a world where there really are no mistakes.
Mm,
It's all for our betterment and learning. The universe isn't happening to me, it's happening for me,
amen.
and exactly in the way it's meant to be. So I'm not going to make any mistakes. I should just surrender and relax
And love,
and love and, have some mushroom sex,
which is love, which
which
is
is
you
love.
remembering that you're God and making love.
Yeah,
Oh,
why
so
not?
I mean, agreed. What else do we incarnate for? I am one to say that like the gods and goddesses need us as much as we need them. They don't have bodies. And so we are literally the hand of the divine. So it's like we came here to experience all of it, the joy, the ecstasy, the agony. But I love that the love is the undercurrent. So I would love for you to give us a tiny, I don't want to leave people hanging on the open loop of the sound as medicine. And then I want to talk
Yes.
about Orion, this amazing
Okay.
app that
Mm-hmm.
you've built. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe do a brief window into sound as medicine. This is something that's very exciting to me because my boyfriend has this bed called Opus, right? It's this vibroacoustic sound bed. And you have done probably more work on sound and emotion than any other living human. And so how could we use sound as medicine?
Well, first of all, I was asked by Donald Hoffman to come up with a mathematical equation for emotional states.
Hmm.
And I did. I came up with a way to do it. And I figured out that there's a direct correlation between musical interval, which is really math, and emotional states. In fact, there's been a lot of research done on this from the standpoint of the relationship between musical intervals like the major third, right, minor second, minor seventh, all these, perfect fifth, perfect fourth, et cetera, et cetera. And within musical interval, there's an inverse pair for each. So a fifth will marry with a fourth, a sixth will marry with a third, and a seventh will marry with a second. Notice they all add up to 9, right? An eighth, an octave, marries with unison. So they all add up to 9. And then within that, except for the fourth and the fifth that have diminished and augmented, and then perfect and perfect, all the other ones have polarity shifts like major and minor, right? So you're getting a little bit of a music theory lesson here. And what I found was that the major third is exactly what everybody wants to listen to when they are thinking about romantic love. So in plays and movies, and you've experienced it, the moment that it's time for the hero and heroine to fall in love, they'll start playing music that has a lot of the da, 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 da. That's the major third. And when it's time for them to break up, then it goes, and it goes, it becomes a minor sixth. All of a sudden, it went from feeling like love to heartbreak. And this is reported in like peer-reviewed kind of studies. And this is all mathematical ratio. And it can be depicted as a triangle. It's as simple as the height of a right triangle over 1/2 its base, or or rather it's a right triangle, so just the base, the height over its base. And then to find its inverse that gives you the exact opposite emotional state, you take the full base of an isosceles triangle, those two right triangles now put into one isosceles triangle, and you take that over the height. So you've just flipped the numerator and denominator, and now you've taken a double length for the base, right? And that gives you the exact opposite feeling emotionally. So is this world we're living in a matrix of frequency that is intended to give us different emotional states? It's almost like, you're a chef and you're putting together all these different foods and everything, and they're actually there to give us this cacophony or symphony of emotional experience. And the way we're experiencing it is for light, it's with our eyes. And for sound, it's with our ears, but it's still the same thing. And for taste, it's with our tongues. And with touch, but they're all just frequency. So we have these senses to be able to derive perceptions that then derive emotional states based on our interpolation of those things, which really cannot be separated from our own conditioning biases, traumas, experiences. One person could experience the exact same thing. It was funny because someone was saying to me, one of the guys in my math team was like, "Oh, wow, you got this thing that's so cool." He goes, "I heard that Apple's going to come out with a new version of this, that people will be able to play the games together and they'll experience the exact same circumstance, but have entirely different experiences with it." I'm like, I think that's called the game of Earth.
Somebody at Apple is really playing the God role very well.
That's right. So when we now can understand that there's a means for us to derive, different emotional states, then you start realizing it's like a ride at Disneyland. And the whole point is for us to just enjoy the ride because the maker wants to entertain us.
And entertain themselves.
Just sit back and enjoy the freaking ride already. Stop worrying. Stop fucking with everything.
Feel your feelings. Enjoy the ride. Love more.
So easy. The whole world will change when everybody does this.
All right. So we feel our feelings. We enjoy the ride. And we love more. Should we make t-shirts? Should we make hats? What do we need to do?
Throw in some mushrooms too. So
okay,
it's
take
like
mushrooms. Have sex on mushrooms.
Yes. All of the
We've got
above.
it. We figured it out. We decoded the universe, you guys. We figured out the meaning of life.
We decoded the universe. I'm telling you, the entire world will change once people start thinking instead of what the world can do for you, what you can do to augment and add to the world that you wanted to see. Be the change you want to see. It's really not more complicated than that. And then everything will become easier. You'll realize that you were always good enough. You'll realize that you were never too much. You were exactly what you were supposed to be. And you'll fall in love with the journey of life because this world is not an escape room to be escaped. This world is an amusement park to be loved. It's a heaven on earth. It's our choice whether we want to make that or not. Do we want to continue in this cycle of samsara and suffering and difficulty? And, being at odds with the concept of duality. I'll give you one simple mathematical approach that I think is actually extremely beautiful. In music, we separate the scale with the square root of 2. So the diminished fifth is the don, 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 don. It's the one that nobody likes to hear. So dogs start barking. Everyone thinks the dog sees the Darth Vader on the TV screen. It's not that that's what scared him. The thing that scares the dog is the sound of this dissonance related to this diminished fifth. And it's all created from duality. Mathematically, it is literally the square root of 2. You start with a note, could be 432 hertz. You multiply it by the square root of 2, and that gives you the diminished fifth in that octave. So it gives you this ugly kind of note, and it happens to be 611 hertz from 432. So that's the same, right, as taking 1.4142, which is the square root of 2, and just multiplying by 432. So what's the importance of this? Well, what it actually is pointing to us is that all the notes in the scale of music are all derived off of duality. Because each note successively, the middle of the scale goes to the diminished fifth, but every note is simply the 1/12th root of 2. And then the second 12th root of 2. And you just multiply it by the unison. The third 12th root of 2. And that separates it like a salami, cutting a salami 12 times across an octave. It's all based on square root of 2, which is the spirit of duality. Duality represents to us suffering and difficulty and pain and anguish and time and aging and all of the negative connotations that we have about it. But if we think about the square root of 2, the square root of 2 is an infinite number. It doesn't stop, goes on forever. It has no repeating patterns. Every conversation that ever was and every conversation that will ever be is inside that mantissa or decimal extension of 1.4142 out into infinity. No repeating patterns in it. So you start looking at that and saying, okay, this is like the essence of the difficulty of life, of suffering. The square root is like an infinite form, and the number 2 is just the compression for that spirit into form, like a body. Like we have a spirit that would be the square root of Robert is my spirit. It's the thing that I'm formed from. It lives beyond me. It's infinite. My physical form is the number 2, or whatever my number is. You follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So there's an infinite form of me. So then the next number that we have to think about would be 3. So when we think of the number 3, we think of a triangle, okay? We think of the Trinity, divinity, godhood, something special about the number 3. So if we take the square root of 3, it turns out to be 1.732050. So what happens if we add the understanding of the essence of the Trinity, the Spirit of God, with the spirit of duality? The square root of 2 plus the square root of 3. The spirit of duality plus the spirit of God. Guess what that number equals?
Pi? Something cool?
Yeah.
Is it pi?
Mm-hmm. It's approximately pi. That's kind of mind-blowing. So the experience of duality plus the spirit of divinity together equal full circle? So if I took this same circle, right, the same circle, and I said, okay, this is 3.146, which is what that value is, right, when you add them together, what proportion of the circle would be the square root of 2 versus the square root of 3? So you have 1.4142 and 1.73205. It turns out that it would be approximately from here, if this is the 0 point on the degree, it would come down to about right here where his foot is, right? And this length of arc would have a certain degree reference. Well, guess what the degree reference would be?
Pi?
No, pi is the whole circle circumference.
Okay.
So you would have from this point, so if this is 3.14, and this would be 360 degrees, and this would be 44.9% percent of the overall circle of 360 degrees, what would be the degree reference from here down to here? I'll tell you. It's 161.8 degrees. Now, 1618 is a very special number in math. It's the golden ratio.
Oh. Oh.
So wait a minute. All this suffering and difficulty of life, when seen without the context of divine essence, without the context of the spirit of godliness, is just suffering. Just like math without meaning is just information. But math with meaning is divine communication. We can now take the suffering of life and see it in the context of the divine. And when we do that, it turns from lead into gold. The square root of 2 is the representation of lead. It represents the planet Saturn. And yet, now we understand that with the divine aspect, all of these things of suffering existed for a reason, for us and our higher learning and best benefit. And what we thought was previously the worst thing that ever happened to us rapidly becomes the best thing that ever happened to us. You know, we don't even remember the teachers that we had in school that were easy on us. We remember the teachers that were hard on us. We remember the ones that pushed us the most. And we look back on those teachers, and when you get invited to go to your Hall of Fame in high school, they have all those teachers there. It happened to me. I didn't even remember the names of the people that did not push me hard.
Mm.
And just like the experiences that were easy in my lifetime, when I die, the ones I will remember and be most grateful for were those teachers that pushed me the hardest. It won't be physical people per se. It'll be the accumulation of the experiences that I had that formed me, that was the refiner's fire, that brought out the best in me and allowed me to realize that the divinity was within me all along. I was what I was searching for. And what I was searching for was searching for me. This is the beauty of life. And when we understand that it's all this musical symphony to tell us through all these different sensory ways that we are divine and that we've chosen all of it, then you'll see the world dramatically shift. We'll feel the empathy, we'll feel all the love and all the pain that people are experiencing, and we'll do it because we realize that it's exactly why we're here. So this is the music that heals. It's the philosopher's stone. It's transmuting the experience of lead into gold.
Mm. And it feels like that union of the masculine and feminine. Like you said, math without meaning is simply information. Pain without God is suffering. But if you can see that divinity inside of the suffering, that that is actually God learning its lessons, that that is the divine expressing itself for the agony and the ecstasy, then that liberates you to enjoy the ride. That liberates you to love more and to enjoy your mushroom sex and stop trying to not have problems.
It's why contrast is so beautiful.
Yeah.
So there's a film on Netflix right now worth watching. It's a cartoon, but it's like a DreamWorks one. And it's called Orion in the Dark.
Of course. Of course.
If you haven't noticed, Orion has been showing up everywhere in the public consciousness. Whether it's, you know, the Orion portal where we were in Egypt, or when we're walking into the pyramid and you know, we come out of the Great Pyramid and there's Orion constellation standing on top of the pyramid straight up.
That was wild. Just
Wild,
right on
right?
top. The apex of the pyramid, all 3 stars. And I think I said to you, like, God is on your side. Like,
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
That's right. So, you know, and then now they're talking about Betelgeuse imminently exploding as a supernova. And while we were there, Betelgeuse was occluded by an asteroid called Lioness 319. And This was like this never before experienced experience. And it happened the day we were there. So none of this was planned. In fact, if you remember, we were supposed to go to Egypt on 11/11. And we ended up changing it to 12/12 because of all of the stuff and uncertainty associated with Gaza and what was happening there. And so this was really kind of a profound alignment. And, Orion, even my television show this year on Codex season 2 is all about Orion remembering why he went on the hero's journey. His relationship to the angelic form, Metatron. It's all in this. And Metatron is just a reference to the metathrone, metathrone, which means the throne beyond. And the throne beyond is derived in the throat chakra.
Oh. So I don't know if you remember when you were the night before you were shooting the series, you and I were texting, and because I feel like I had to message you because I was interviewing Hella, who's on our trip. She's a channel, and I invited her to open her channel. And she's like, I don't know who comes through, so I'm just going to open it and then you can ask who it is. And so I said, who are we speaking with? And she said, this is a fractal of Metatron. And so I had never heard of Metatron before. So of course I looked it up. And then when you told me that your whole season 2 of your Codex show was going to be called Metatron, I was like, get out of town. So can you give us for my little amount of research, it's an archangel. It was like a human who ascended into angelic forms and angelic realms.
Yeah, he was a man named Enoch. Orion, the same one, who ascended into angelic forms. The history that we read and hear about Lemuria and about Atlantis and about the ancient biblical times, what we think of as our distant past is also our distant future. Mm-hmm. We're living in a cycle that's a repetition cycle. We process through the equinox at the same time that we precess through it. So we go from Pisces to the next being Aries, and then Aries being Taurus, and then Taurus being, followed by Gemini, and then Cancer, and then Leo, and then Virgo, and then Libra, right? All the way through. But while we go forward on an annual basis, just like that, we equally go backward. So we just went from Piscean age in the 24,000 year cycle to Aquarius. If it were going forward, it would have gone from Pisces to Aries. But we went from Pisces to Aquarius because in the long cycle, it goes backwards. So literally every moment we go forward, we're also going backwards. Mm. You follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's a Mobius strip. Time is a Mobius strip. There's only now. We separate it into these two aspects of duality, past and future, but maybe the way we perceive it is entirely not correct.
Mm. This is why I wanted to title this episode, why isn't everyone studying the ancient past to unlock our future, or decoding the past to unlock our future?
It's funny. It's also a metaphor for going out into the world and studying the world around you, and then finally realizing that the answers are all found within. But actually studying the world around you is studying the world within, mm-hmm. and vice versa. Just as studying the past is studying the future simultaneously, and studying the future is studying the past.
Mm. So I want to make sure that we talk about Orion. I want to be respectful of your time. So you have spent an extraordinary amount of time, energy, resources building this amazing app that I've gotten to witness and use, mm-hmm. and you gave us a whole demonstration on it in Egypt. And I want to know, what was the impetus for this? Why did you start? Why did you invest so much of your own resources? And why have you spent so much time and energy building this app? It's not like the world needs another app, but this one, right? Why this? What was your inspiration?
Well, I realized in 2018 that data was going to become the world's most valuable asset. Mm-hmm. And that we were all living on a data plantation without even knowing it, as part of this game that we're living, right? And that whole industries now have been created to harvest that data. And in that same context, there's also been a huge movement, especially around COVID and around the pandemic, to hush voices so that, certain platforms would literally just shut you off. And that's not in keeping with what the world needs from a spiritual perspective. It's like every emotion you didn't feel needs to be felt. And every word you didn't say needs to be said. Like literally, every word you didn't say needs to be said. That's part of this awakening and clearing process. So my desire was, okay, how could I build a platform that people could literally use and benefit from? I've always been good at manifesting things, and I knew that I could commit to something. And, we spent $65 million building a platform that's a whole new social media platform that is founded on the principle of you own your own data, and you are allowed here to free your voice. And there's no censorship and there's no monitoring. And because it's all on blockchain, it cannot be forced and given up by any company.
And no
Because
bots.
we can't even do it. It's impossible. And it's got the world's strongest encryption. And so this was intended to flatten borders around the world, so that now you can have gigantic groups to communicate in encrypted social media, as well as group chat. The largest group chats that are encrypted, that are encrypted with, standard encryption are like 1,000 people. And we wanted to be able to have full encrypted group chats for billions of people. So we built a platform intended to scale at that level so that humanity can actually share their voice. You can't lose your data, and you can also store it all on this blockchain that cannot be taken away. And this was the vision, because I believed that data is the intangible personal property of your identity. It's who you are, and it's an extension of you, and therefore it needs to be always protected, not only by you, and the way to protect it is through top cryptographic protocols, putting a fence around it. And you should be the only one that has it. So it should be protected by the Constitution, which it already is. Your ownership protects it. But in today's world, there's so many things that are happening that, are intended to take that data from you. And I actually see this as an opportunity to finally create an age of human being instead of human doing. Because this data is so valuable that it literally holds the promise of becoming the first real opportunity for humanity to have a universal passive income. And only you should be allowed to decide whether or not you want to monetize that. So what we've done is we created a platform for you to be able to capture your own data, put a fence around it, and never sell it, or decide that you do if you decide that's what you want to do, but it's yours to determine. And we created a messaging and a social media platform as the first step. And then in addition, we're in the process of creating a new browser that's quantum secure, that literally, makes it so that nobody can get your cookies and all the information and everything, because everything becomes encrypted.
And then potentially like a new video conferencing platform down the track. Is that
Yes,
still
it's
in
a
the works?
full-on that happens this summer. We have a full replacement for Zoom that's all super encrypted, and there's no limit to how many people you can have on there simultaneously. And we're even going to have all the languages integrated into it eventually.
That is blowing my mind. I mean, that's like back to the Tower of Babel. It's like, well, now we can communicate with each other again through one app, one place. So just to translate this to people, in case you're like, what is blockchain? I don't need to protect my data. I don't need to encrypt anything. I just want to like put this into real talk for folks. So when we were in Egypt, you're like, I think that the spiritual community is going to get targeted first. I want to make sure that the spiritual community can communicate. And then since then, my email list got shut down. I have my email list, like my whole business, like all of Ziva is an email marketing company. It got taken away, shut down because of, I don't like our habits are immaculate. Like we don't spam anyone. We don't sell anything. We delete people who aren't engaged. Like we could not have a cleaner email list. And they were like, you violated something. So my business would be gone like instantaneously if they just decided that we weren't in the rules. And then yesterday I was talking to my ads person and they said, oh yeah, we can't tag people anymore. We can't find people based on their spiritual interests. Every 3 weeks, Facebook is removing one of the tags. And so it's very limited. So it was just a real life example of exactly why Orion needs to exist and why I'm
Yeah.
so excited about it. And so I just want to say thank you for creating this. And if people want to start, if people want to try it out, where should they find it?
They just go to orionmessenger.io.
Okay.
And we've already got, we're in the beta right now of it, but it's going to be going live in a couple of months. And it's a fantastic app. I mean, you use it to replace now. It replaces. I don't use WhatsApp anymore now,
Hmm.
right? So it replaces that, but it also has a full Instagram platform within it as well for
Mhm.
communities. There's no bots on it because there's a subscription. This is how you protect yourself. If you're not paying a subscription for your social media, you are the product. And your data is way more valuable than the few bucks a month, right, that this costs,
Mhm.
or any platform that would basically help protect your data. So there's no bots, there's no advertising. I don't want to be beholden to any advertisers because advertisers will always inevitably take away your free speech. They put pressure on a company. They did it to Elon Musk. They're trying to do it. He's the richest man in the world. Disney basically said, okay, we're going to stop advertising and we're going to try to drive you guys under. And he's like, okay, well, then you might just drive us under because, you know, we need the advertising. And they're stuck with that model, but not
Mhm.
if you have a subscription model. And so the subscription here is $8.88 per month. It's free right now in beta. And we have, they're mainly people from the spiritual community that are already on the wait lists. I expect it's going to be, we're not looking for the whole world to be on this platform. We don't need the whole world to be on this platform. I mean, basically, right now, everyone's invited. They can all participate in it if they want, and I can't take it away from people. But basically, we've got about 20,000 people right now on the wait list to just get into the beta. So that's pretty decent. That's pretty good.
Mhm.
And the beta is very active. So we're
Great.
about to do another beta expansion. It'll be very quickly at the 20,000 level, and then I'd say 100,000 and million level very soon. And I'm very excited about it because the level of content discussion on there is fabulous. And we also have a bunch of content that's going into it that is all about wellness and spirituality. That
Mm.
one of my other companies is called Access Elite, and we had tens of thousands of hours of curated content. All the Access Elite content is going to be available on the platform. And also our new spiritual life simulation game that we created, which will be next week. It'll be on this thing even.
Cool.
Maya is available through Orion as well,
Okay.
which is the coolest damn thing. I don't want to tell anybody about it because it's literally mind blowing. It's mind blowing.
It's just to give people a teeny tiny teaser. It might give you a window into the magic we got to experience in Egypt.
Yeah, I wanted to bring everyone the experience of what Egypt is like into their own virtual world and raise your consciousness or help raise your consciousness in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So that by doing a series of tests and little challenges in this game that you can play as a group or by yourself, you can experience higher consciousness. And
Mm.
it's a very fun, very creative, like amazing game that I think everyone's going to absolutely love. So
Mm.
that was just sort of the fun aspect of this. But this has been a very large project. We've got a very strong team. I've been blessed in that I've founded 11 companies in my lifetime, and I've had the chance to take companies to very successful heights. And that maybe I used to think it was because I was a hard worker and because I was good with leading people and stuff. And now I realize it might just be as simple as the astrology and numerology I was born under. And that's okay.
And your brilliance and your heart and your dedication. And either way, if it's predetermined or if you have created it, and probably both, right? Because probably it's that
I think
individuality and that duality.
destiny might just be, and that's what I've said many times,
Hmm.
destiny is the free will of the higher self.
Destiny is the free will of the higher self. I love that. Well, Robert, I love you. Thank you so much for sharing so generously your wisdom, your unique way of seeing the world. Thank you for creating new. You're like a, if you were a psychedelic, I think that you would be mushrooms because you are rewiring my brain in real time. You're creating new neural connections in real time that once I see, I can't unsee. So thank you for being the human transmission of
Now
psilocybin.
I'm wondering which mushroom, but that's okay. That's another one.
We won't call it penis envy.
I knew you were going to say that.
Well, so I just want to let people know you have an amazing podcast called Think Tank. You are very active on Instagram.
And my website, robertedwardgrant.com. And
Hmm.
Codex on Gaia. You could watch like 3 episodes on YouTube. You can find them. Just do a search for Codex.
It's
Code
so
X are
good.
2 separate words.
Highly, highly recommend watching this. It takes like we sort of gave people an amuse bouche and like a little teaser, but if you watch that show, it talks all about Leonardo da Vinci and your connection and the discovery of the pyramids, and it's really, really well done. So highly recommend that.
And the entry into spirituality. And there's been another show that's branched off of it by Alan Green called The Shakespeare Code, which, is a branch off of that. And it's funny because my show, Matthias DiStefano's, and Alan's, and Ancient Civ are all kind of converging together.
Which makes so much sense. I mean, watching the three of you in a room together, like you're having one dream, Alan's having another dream, Matthias is seeing something in his channeling. So it's so beautiful to see how these circles keep overlaying into this flower of life, right? We keep building this beautiful tapestry where each of our voices are needed, where each of these strokes of the paintbrush are needed. So I'm outrageously grateful to you as a friend, as a teacher. I'm so grateful that you exist on planet Earth, and truly thank you for your time and your generosity in sharing so much wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much, Emily. Such a pleasure to see you.
Sweet friends, if you have enjoyed this episode, please tag us on Instagram at Robert Edward Grant, at Ziva Meditation. Let us know what you thought. We love hearing the feedback of this media as medicine. And we will see you next week on Why Isn't Everyone Doing This?